Welcome back to The Circle. We all judge ourselves, others, the world around us. It happens fast, often, without us even realizing it most of the time. Today, we're exploring how men can work with judgment, how to notice it, understand it, and transform it into a tool of growth. Tim, are you ready to go all in?
I'm ready.
Let's go. So in men's work, we talk a lot about presence, about being the witness, fully seeing what's in front of us, but judgment can uproot us, pulling us from observation into reaction. How do you see judgment showing up in men's lives, and how does it affect their ability to stay present?
For me, I think that judgment is challenging because it is so interwoven into our lives and our culture. This idea that there is a right way or a standard that we're all supposed to know and be able to achieve. And there's often a lot of assumption around that. And so I was thinking about this earlier when I thought to myself, one of the challenges of judgment and this idea that there's a right way and then therefore a wrong way is that a lot of times there's actually one right way and many wrong ways, depending on your perspective or your upbringing, your culture, but whatever. And so this sort of threat of getting it wrong is pervasive. I think it weighs heavily. And then we live in a culture where it's hard for us to ask for help or for clarification or for questions, which is what part of men's work does. So I think, when men come to men's work wanting fuller expression, one of the first things we need to do is shine the light of awareness on areas where people feel stuck or held or paralyzed in some way because they feel like they need to do it right, and they don't entirely know what that means. And I think I've seen a lot of men with that experience.
Absolutely. When the admitting that you're wrong, right? That like if you are going through the world with this sense of there's a right way and a wrong way, and if one of the first steps is to just like ask for help, you have to admit that you're wrong. That is a super vulnerable thing. But if we can reframe it into like, I need a little bit of help because I'm struggling with something very specific, and I think that can be a little helpful as well.
Yeah, I think asking for help is a really powerful thing. It also makes me think about the queer experience and this idea that being wrong could question your safety. Being wrong could be dangerous to you. So I think that's one slice of it for a queer person in particular. If I'm wrong, I could get yelled at, I could get made fun of, I could get singled out, I could get beaten up, I could, any number of things. And then I think number two is with certain aspects, I can never be right in the context of what I'm being told right is. So, the most obvious example is don't be queer. And, when you come to the realization that that isn't a choice you can make, you have to wrestle with this idea, well, there's a right way and a wrong way. And according to this manner of thinking, I can never be right, which I think is then hard to work with.
Yeah, that's been a big part of my self-work and self-reflection lately is diving into judgment and that fear, that threat of getting things wrong. And what does that mean? And so I have really been kind of like paralyzed in certain situations of like, am I going to do this right? And I think that it comes from very early on, like being so afraid that like I'm not right, that there's something about me that is incorrect, that it's wrong, that like I'm not going to fit the mold of what my upbringing was telling me was the right way to be, right? That I was going to grow up and be a father and be a husband and like have, the kind of that classic life. I was like, well, that's not me. And so I really thought I was like, then I'm wrong, right? If that's the right way to be, then I'm wrong. So the moralistic judgment was very like, I was internalizing.
And I don't think that there's a lot of areas, or at least in my experience, where this allowance to be wrong is welcomed. But I feel compelled now to say I feel fortunate that I was an artist. I was a dancer and a choreographer, and I studied and immersed myself in that. And so there are so many books, but one in particular written by Twyla Tharp, The Creative Habit. And Twyla Tharp was the director and choreographer of my first Broadway show, Moving Out. She's a genius and a force of modern dance. And she wrote this self-help book helping people get connected to their creativity. But some of the creativity required an allowance for what we might describe as a mistake. Now, I don't think she said it that way, and it's been a long time since I read that book, but not even mistakes, but in the process of finding whatever it is you're creating, there can be a messiness. So, for example, when we think about baking, and I don't know why I'm making this metaphor because I don't bake and I should learn, but you think about the kitchen and what we end up judging is whatever the end product is. And we never beat up the baker for, there was flour on the counter or there was, eggshell and, that isn't how we do it, right? But in other aspects of our lives, that's exactly what we do. Like, I'm going to judge you. Your hands are covered in flour. You're dirty. You're messy. Like, I'm going to judge you right now. And a person who's aware of the process would say, well, I'm in the middle of doing the thing. Potters get dirty. Dancers get sweaty. Makeup artists get powder on, their shirts are covered in makeup. That's how it, no one judges that. So honoring that process, I think, is part of what we need to do as a society and part of what we do in men's work, because we're allowed to be a little messy. We're allowed to be at that point where we start to shake or tremble, and it isn't a judgment of you're doing it wrong. It's a judgment of you're still doing it. Or it's a celebration of you're still doing it.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I'm hearing when I hear you talk about that. There's a physicality, or there's a physical rightness, wrongness of like, if we want something to be good, then it has to be clean, right? So like if somebody is messy, they're not good, they're not right. There's something, they are messy, not clean. So in that there is a judgment, right? And what does messiness, what does sloppiness, what does that invoke? So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is kind of this being okay with being in the process and not getting something right. But in pursuit of many things, the end goal may be a right thing or a right way to do something. So like I have baked a lot. And so there is a pursuit of like getting a recipe right, like having followed the correct steps. And I can imagine in dance, there are certain dance types that it's like getting the moves right, technically.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's where sometimes there is a lot of like judgment built into things, is because we have so many like analytical things in our lives of like, this is how you do things.
I'm going to just jump. I was fortunate enough to be watching the New York City Ballet. I can't remember how long ago this was at Lincoln Center. And Wendy Wayland was doing this contemporary ballet piece with, I think, 7 other unbelievably talented dancers. And they were going for it. And I would describe it in greater detail, but if you don't know dance, anyway, going for it. And so she was too. And she is a superstar, by the way. If you don't know Wendy Wayland, I think it's called Wounded Creature. Watch her documentary. Unbelievable. Anyway, she fell. She was going for it so hard that she slipped off her point shoe and fell down for a second, jumped right back up, kept going. And it almost made it better. It kind of reminded us, these people are at the edge. That is the intensity of what they're doing. And I think it's easier sometimes. Again, I'm going to talk about the Olympics. We talk about the gymnasts and Simone Biles and whatnot. We know that they're at their edge. They make a mistake. We can be disappointed, but we don't like judge it. And it was that moment of, you fell down, but it's okay.
I would say probably most people aren't going to judge. They're going to see the humanity, but there might be a critic in the crowd. Somebody who is not necessarily like the job of critic, but there could be somebody who is very critical that could say like, she messed up. She's not good.
Totally.
Right. Like,
I mean, we're talking about Wendy Wayland. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. I think that that sort of archetype of critic, that critical person, has come from having been criticized. And so you're kind of constantly on the lookout for moments and situations in which you can be criticized. It's so uncomfortable. And then you just become highly attuned to it. I have a speech impediment. It's been a thing I've had my whole life. And so when another person has one, I pick up on it almost immediately. It's just because it's a thing I've paid attention to. So I think that's prevalent in our society, and it isn't really serving us, because in this example, the dance piece was amazing. I actually thought as a dancer, it made it more exciting because I understood how much they were doing. But there are people who are like, there's the way or not the way.
Right. But, and also like, if I don't have the awareness, if I don't have the studiedness of seeing, like, if Wendy is the first dancer I've ever seen, right? Like, I don't know that like she's that excellent. I really don't. I don't.
No, of course, you have nothing to compare it to.
When if I see her fall, I'm like, she just fell, right? And that to me, like, is the difference of like, I could notice that she fell, observation, versus she fell, she's a bad dancer, judgment.
So I want to go into that because we talked about that in Circle. You did such a great job. But before we do that, it's so prevalent, this idea recently, during the last Olympics, there was this sort of joke going around about having one average person in every Olympic final. Because you look at like these 8 swimmers and you're like, oh, that guy in lane 6 is falling behind. And the idea was, oh, but if you put a regular person in there, you'd still realize they're all so good. Mm-hmm. And this is like fractions of excellence that we're really looking at. But we have that critical, like, oh, you just lost by a lot. And you're like, well, there's 35 people that didn't even make it into the final. And there are hundreds and thousands of people who never even made it to the Olympics.
Well, I think this invites in a relative of judgment, which is comparison, right? Which I think can be valuable. So I think all that we're talking about with judgment and comparison and all this stuff, like, these are natural human tendencies. We go through the world and have evolved through the world to recognize, oh, something may be bigger than I am, right? So maybe I have to like take that awareness and do something with it, right? I think it's when we say that like bigger is better, right? That's when that judgment gets a little bit tricky and critical. So I would say, like, even in the swimming situation, the swimming example, like, why are we saying that, like, oh, if you swim fast, you're good, right? It's in pursuit of excellence, of like striving for some sort of end goal, right? Versus like, can we be a little bit more like sterile about it maybe, and say like, that person swam however many meters in this amount of time, and in comparison to the rest, in comparison to the average, pace of a swimmer, that person is X longer. That's not as sexy to say. You'd rather say they're the fucking best, right? They're the best. Like, look how good they are.
That is
right?
not a sexy.
It's not a sexy way to say it, right? But then that's kind of how, like.
Yeah. So I think when we think about it in our daily lives, that's a great practice to start recognizing when we are putting values on things. Is this better or worse, stronger or weaker, like those sorts of things, especially if they don't serve us. And then I think there are moments where, okay, you're in the Olympics. Everyone wants to do their very best. Just go for the gold. I get that we are
best being defined as, right? Like,
right. But so we can wrap our head around. There is a shared goal in an Olympic final. There is a shared goal.
Yeah.
And could we bring to that an appreciation for how much unbelievable talent there is? And I think that's the missing piece. Oh, they won the gold, they won the silver, they won the bronze. That's amazing, right? Like, you get on the podium, you have that moment. But everyone else who was even in the building as a competitor is like at the top 0.2% of their, sport.
Right. But now I think of like even Drag Race, because this could be similar, right? Like,
okay, this is a great episode.
Like if we think about the current season, right, and like it's completely stacked with talent, right? We still look at those bottom queens like at least I do. Like, I judge them so quickly. I'm like, oh, how did you even get on the show? Right? Like, oh, that's what you brought, that's what you did. And I'm like, I have to catch myself all the time. I'm like, they made it through an intensive casting process. They had to put themselves out there. They had to go through the interviews. They had to do the thing. And they have been deemed the best drag queens in America to compete in this current season.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I forget that, right? Because I'm just looking at them like on the surface. And so I think that's a lot of what maybe judgment is. Judgment is very surface level, right? It's like a quick, immediate reaction. It's that like I'm comparing it to something, and in my judgment, in my bias, I am saying it is good, bad, right or wrong.
Yeah. And we've seen on a lot of reality TV shows, contestants will say all the time, it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah.
And, with Drag Race as the example, you think they are given a list of possible categories. There's a lot of context they don't have. So,
and a lot of time, they do not have a lot of time either.
Right. And then you think, okay, well, I show up with what I thought was going to be the best. Now in context, it isn't really the best. Do I have the time or the skill set to take what I thought was going to work and make it what it is going to work? Oftentimes, no, I have to wear what I brought. And then we can all sit at home on our couch or in like
eating
the local bar
and judging. It's so easy.
The bonbon, be like, yeah, I would have done it differently. Well, with all this context,
I'm Kathy Siegel sitting on the couch and for married and children, just
yeah, totally. Well, this is why judgment is so. I think that judgment is really baked in to our culture, and so it will come kind of easily. And everyone's been judged, and everyone's watched people judging. So the compassion just takes a lot more work. The pausing for a moment of consideration is a lot harder. And then final thing I would say is, I think in our culture at least, it feels like there's this value to it's easier and better to think something's bad than it is to think it's good. So I don't know what the word is for that, but this idea of like, that's, that movie wasn't, that piece of art, because it almost feels a little bit like, well, I'm trying to put myself up in this position as the connoisseur of like the highest form of whatever I'm looking at. And so even if I don't know anything about the art, if I pretend to be like, it's fine, then you're going to perceive me to be a person who's above it. And I think that does a real disservice, because a lot of times you're like, you don't even know what you're talking about.
But like if somebody can convince you that they're an expert, then they can't be wrong. Right? They can't have that vulnerability. They can't have that I've noticed this sometimes, that when people are put on the spot, if they don't know the answer, I've seen this so many times in corporate America. If somebody doesn't know the answer and they don't have the humility, they will just sit there on the spot and start making shit up.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've attached themselves so much to being an expert, and they're like, oh crap, like if I don't get this right, if I don't say the right thing right now, then like I might lose my job. I might get a demotion, or somebody might get a promotion over me. Like all these things that could happen to somebody, right? Instead of saying like, I don't have the answer to that right now, but I'll get back to you.
Well, that was built into my acupuncture education. We were trained from a very early point in the program, never tell a patient something you don't know. And there's a real freedom in that, to say, oh, I know a lot of stuff and I can offer you what I know. But I actually don't know that. I'll look for it. I'll try to figure it out. Or I might even know that I'll never be able to know it, or it's not my job to know it and someone else should know it. And I'll refer you to the person who you should be speaking to. But yeah, this, I don't know has a lot of power, because this idea that we're supposed to know everything is crazy. Think about the internet and all the, no, there's no way that you know everything about everything. It is impossible. And there's something really trustworthy when, I know a lot about yoga, and I know a lot about, some other things, but there's a lot of stuff I don't know about. I think we can all relate to that.
Absolutely. And there's also one of the practices that I had, or one of the sits that I had at a recent meditation retreat, was around this concept of like the layers of I don't know. And I hadn't ever clicked the confidence that you can feel from saying, okay, well, if I'm floating through space and I don't know something, I'm like, oh, well, like that could be terrifying. But then I can hold on to something is that like, I do know that I don't know.
Mm.
And I like that little like simple realization, I was like, whoa, there's so much power in that. Right. And like, I think that bringing it back to judgment is like, like instead of judging things so quickly, like I can, start to admit when I might not know something or I might not be fully confident about something and I might not like understand like something completely. And instead of it being my initial reaction, right? Like in the opener, I talked about like, we talk about presence and being the witness, right? Like I can get pulled out of being the witness of observing what's in front of me if I judge it. If I'm judging it super quickly, and I can pull myself back by saying like, oh, well, okay, I went to that point of judgment because I didn't know something. And then I wasn't familiar with something or someone. And so I judged them. And now I'm pulling myself back and I'm going to say like, okay, like now can I like set that judgment aside and actually observe what's in front of me and then start to like bring in a little bit more curiosity around it.
Yeah, this is bringing up for me the teaching of emptiness, right? And how the content of our mind and our perspectives and our perceptions are projected onto everything. And just bringing a little bit of awareness to that, I think can help us to pause into, I'm going to think it's good or bad, right or wrong, valuable or not valuable. And instead, let me just have a minute with whatever it is and then decide from there, well, how do I want to engage or not engage with whatever? Yeah.
I think there's so many examples. Like you talked about like good, bad, like right, wrong. I think there's also like, there's so many layers to judgment. There's so many different ways that we can judge things. Like I even think of like if there's a couple, right? And like one person is a little bit more like wanting of attention than the other, then one case that person could be needy. And on the other case, like if that person isn't willing to like give that attention, they could be aloof, right? And just how quickly we are to like label, to classify, to categorize. And like even under that, if we like think of neediness or aloofness, like we've now said, oh, there's a right way to be.
But this all also has a standard, right? So in the example that you just gave, which I really appreciate, each of them comes from the perspective. So like, you talked about like the needy person, but that person might be judged as needy from the perspective of someone who doesn't want to give as much as that person is looking to have, right? Or to take, or to, or asking for, right? The person who is judged for being aloof, they're probably judged from the perspective of a person who is wanting more from them. So, oh, you're not giving me all that I want. You are aloof. Now, is that true? It's hard to say. It's not that there's anything wrong with that evaluation, but is it actually true? Like, what is the fact there? And is jumping to a you are this or you are that helping you or whomever you've just labeled?
And I think this is where like I've studied nonviolent communication a little bit, and this is the foundation of it. Is like, can we be aware of when we're bringing in the judgment, and then start to say like, okay, like now let me make an observation of it, and saying, okay, like if my moralistic judgment right now is that my partner is aloof or is needy, can I now classify it into an observation of like, hey, my love, like, I'm hoping that like I would like to spend, an hour with you today, right? And just like kind of starting to quantify and saying like, okay, the last time I asked for this, I didn't get it, right? And so now we start to like look at what it is that we might be needing, because what judgment does is it focuses so much on the what is what or who is who rather than what's alive inside of us, right? It's very
what is happening.
Yeah.
So this goes, I love that example. I am also curious, is that how you talk? Do you say, Hey, my love, or what did you say?
Hey, my love. Yeah.
This is making me think about my yoga mentor, Narayani, who I've mentioned numerous times now on this podcast. I love you, Narayani.
Come on the show.
Come on the show. Narayani, come on the show, please. We want you here. An incredible woman, yogi and Buddhist. And she said one of the things, we should never complain about the weather because it's just kind of railing against what is happening. And based on what you're saying, instead of being like, oh, it's the rain is bad, the rain is good, the snow, whatever the thing is, just, oh, it's raining. And because it's raining, I should get an umbrella or a raincoat or, take the car, not my bike, whatever the thing, and there's a whole different feeling around the approach to, I need to get a different jacket, then can you believe that this is happening to me?
Yeah.
And there's a freedom in, well, it's raining and it rains. And then if we go to the emptiness thing, sometimes rain is good. If you're in LA right now, rain is good, right? So the value can change based on context and perspective.
Absolutely. I think that there can be a preference, right? Like I can prefer that
not wetness.
Not wetness.
Yeah, I prefer not wetness, generally speaking.
Right? Like generally like that is a preference, right? But it's like, can I communicate that preference?
Yeah.
Right? Rather than assigning a judgment to something.
Right. So it sounds like we're getting like this idea that judgment a lot of times can be an attachment to our preference. So when I think of situation X, I think it should happen this way. And then if it doesn't happen that way, I assign a value to it. And then the question really becomes, is that in service to us in any way? Does that make us happier? Does it make us more productive, more relaxed, more engaging, more authentic, whatever the thing is we're trying to be? And I would argue that I can't think of a time when it does. When I think, oh, when I said that person was a bad person, that made me have a better day. I can't imagine. I don't remember one time in my life where that's been the truth for me.
I think there can be an honor in connecting to what it is you value in this life. So let's go back to the couple example. If person A values more connection, more quality time, more physical touch, right? And person B doesn't share those same values, they have a value misalignment, right? And so instead of bringing in the moralistic judgment of aloofness or neediness, we can have a conversation based on needs, right? And based off of core values and what's important to us. And then making a decision that okay, if I had labeled that person bad, needy, or aloof, right? Like maybe my action moving forward, if I can't get my needs met through this person, maybe my choice is I have to go my separate ways, right? Like, so the badness of that judgment of something being bad, can be a signal, right? To step back, be aware of it, and then make decisions from there, just like rain.
Right.
So I'm going to make a decision to put on a jacket or grab an umbrella.
Right. So it feels like from that place, we have two options. One is I can break up with you because you're an asshole.
Judgment.
Right. Or I can break up with you because we don't have shared values and my needs aren't being met.
That's correct.
And I don't need you to be the villain. And I don't need to be the villain. There doesn't have to be a right or a wrong. That's or right. A good or a bad. It can just be what is. I really need this. You don't need that. You don't you need something else. I've seen that a lot. That there's a lot of relationship stuff where it's easy to fall into that. It's also easy because if I have emotions, I'm feeling hurt, then saying goodbye to something might be easier if I'm mad at it. If I decide that it's bad, maybe it makes it easier. But I think there's more power in a recognition. You have a set of needs, and so do I. And now they are not in alignment. Is it more powerful for us to move in the direction of where we can find those things?
It makes it much less about what is what, rather than what is happening.
Right. So what's happening is a relationship where the two people aren't having their needs met. And that does not mean that any of those people in that relationship are bad or failing, or, it doesn't mean that people can't be bad or failing in relationships. It just means that it doesn't always have to be that. It can be.
And subjectively speaking, right? Like what that might mean for a person based off of what they value.
Exactly. Right. Well, I mean, I think we could say, yeah.
I think there are some values that like many people share, right? There are values around like how we treat one another, right? And that is where a moralistic judgment of like, if you don't treat people the way that we think that we all are valuing how we think we should treat people, then that is where badness can come from. That's where villainousness, villainy,
vilifying if.
Let's go with it.
Vilification. I don't know. Is it
vilification?
Vilification. There we go.
That's where the vilification of something can come from, right?
Someone please recommend us a podcast about words and grammar. Yeah. I mean, right. And then
Grammarly, do you want to sponsor this podcast?
Word of the day: vilification. It might be a real word.
I'm going to make it a real word.
I mean, it is right now.
I'm going to incorporate it into the episode description.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. And so I think when we think about judgment and men's work, we have to realize that we have a lot of judgments about other people. And we've talked about that a lot, but we also judge ourselves. And the practices and the approach of men's work, the physical practices, the breath, the inquiry, the conversations are an attempt to show up as we are, and as we are isn't perfect, and sort of recognizing that. And so when we talk about our edges, when we talk about our strong suits and our weaknesses, our triggers, our shadows, all these things, each time we kind of get into that material, we allow ourselves an opportunity to recognize what is without judging it, or practicing trying not to judge it. So when we think about our shadow loosely defined as parts of ourselves that we are like unwilling to look at in ourselves, or trying to hide from ourselves or from other people, they often look like things we might describe as bad. But part of the work is to not start at that place, and rather, there's an angry part of me. Like what were you here to do, angry part? And kind of investigate it from that. Chances are that angry part of you was there to protect you. Well, chances are most of your shadow is there to protect you in some way or the other. And the practice of trying to meet it without being your bad. The reason it becomes a shadow, the reason we shove it away is because we've labeled it as not good or not welcomed or unacceptable to our community, or
I think a big part of the practice is, again, like can we notice it without getting fully swept up into it? Right? Like can I be aware of where I might be falling into that, rather than fully getting swept into it and getting pulled out of my groundedness. And I think that when I'm in practice and I'm starting to have a lot of those judgments, it pulls me completely out of being present. I'm no longer present. I'm ruminating in the past or future casting, right? But I'm definitely not.
Can you give us an example, like you're in the middle of some practice and something? Can you?
Yeah. So I would say even in like synchronized breath practices, like it can happen very quickly, because I'm like, I'm not inhaling as big as that other person. And so I'm like, should I be inhaling bigger? Like, are my lungs not as capable as that person's? Am I doing this the right way? I'm not vocalizing as much as that person. Or in some cases, like, am I vocalizing too much? Is my breath too big? Is my breath is bigger than that person? Like, am I doing it wrong? Am I going too much? Am I too much right now? Right? Like all these things that will take me away from my practice.
So I'm going to jump on this because partner practice, where we do some eye gazing and synchronize our breath. Our teacher, Amir Khaligi, will sometimes say, and these are not his exact words. I don't want to get it wrong, but he'll
just dub
sometimes
them
say
over top.
the person with the bigger breath will be holding the masculine pole. No, so talking about but yeah, so okay, so this polarity idea. There's nothing wrong with what he said, but I remember thinking, like, the first few times I heard it, then I started sensing around the room, oh, well, now everyone's trying to have the biggest breath because no one wants to be holding the feminine pole, because we have a judgment about what the feminine pole means as a man in this world. And this is among men who are doing conscious men's work, right? So, still deep down, there's a judgment. To be feminine as a man is, I'm going to say bad, but I'm sure that we could come up with a bunch of different words, and therefore I'm going to deepen my breath to try to make it bigger than yours so that I'm holding the masculine so that you're holding the feminine. And I don't think you're bad for holding the feminine. I just know that I can't. And that to me is sort of fascinating, because that's how deeply woven it is. Instead of, well, someone's got to be the feminine pole. Like when you think about magnets, you're like, if you want those two things to pull together, the one's got to be plus and one's got to be minus. Like, we're not judging the minus. You know what I'm talking about with positive, negative. We're not judging it. It's like, without it, there is no connection. And yet, from our perspective, well, I'm like, my breath is bigger. Like, I'm holding the masculine pole, and you're like, okay, easy, everybody.
The amount of times that I've been in that exact moment, and I've been like, and this even goes into some gay programming for myself.
I was just about to bring it up,
right? Like bottom shaming, or like the shame that I feel sometimes if I bottom, right? Is that like I'm not going to be the bottom. Like, I can get very defensive very quickly.
So this is the crazy thing for me about this, and we have to unpack it, for everyone, but for our community. If you think about two straight couples, man and a woman, right? A man and a woman. And there are two of them. Mm-hmm. So a man and a woman and a man and a woman. And we say couple A, their favorite sexual position is missionary. And couple B likes, cowgirl or whatever, I do not immediately jump to well, this means this about this couple and that means that about them, right? But in our community, we get to this, you're the receptive partner, and that immediately means that you are
submissive, weak,
the one who's out of control, and you're like, what? It's crazy. It's this weird perception. It doesn't serve us at all. It's a little bit like some people like getting neck massages and some people don't. Yeah. What does that mean about you? It doesn't mean anything about you except you like or you dislike a neck massage.
Right, but I think if we bring it to the breath practice of those men in that space, myself included, as soon as you tell me whoever has the biggest breath is holding the masculine pole, I'm like, well, I'm not going to be the feminine partner.
Well, and
I'm not going to be the feminine partner because being feminine is bad.
Well, and I would say that I have felt, and so maybe there's a slice of this with you too, that it's as one of the few queer people in this space, I definitely can't be the feminine partner right now because you all expect me to be. Even though I don't know that to be true. It's and I've actually shared about this in a really powerful circle. People have mentioned this later, but I shared something along those lines where I said to a whole group of straight men where I'm I don't think about the sex you have. I don't think about it. I don't think about your favorite position or what you're into. I'm but I think you think I think about the sex you have. And then I carry that with me because they like to hypersexualize queer people. And so that was a thing I had to start working through because I'm I think you believe that I'm sexualizing you. I'm not sexualizing you, but you think I am. And now I'm going to compensate so that you're certain I'm not sexualizing you, which meant at one point, this man in the work, we were at a retreat center and he came up and he put his arm around me. I was so uncomfortable. I was so uncomfortable in my physical body in that moment. Not because I didn't want his arm around me or I feared a closeness with him. It was because I didn't know what he thought I thought about it. And then I was if he thinks that I'm in this moment, sexually aroused and in my feminine, whatever, that I was that makes me uncomfortable. And so I ended up moving out of it. It's a thing we have to work on.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of judgment to unpack there. right? Like,
Well, this is the right episode.
yeah, I mean, like on a lot of these sides, right? Like the idea that a heterosexual person is thinking about homosexual or queer sex, they may be judging it because they don't know. Maybe there is a curiosity of like that's where their brain goes to, and now they're judging it. Because I know I did that for a long time before I like truly understood my sexuality. Like I was there. I was judging it too because I was like I just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know like how gay worked.
Okay.
Right. And so like I did have a lot of judgment around it. And I had a lot of like also curiosity. And that would be a lot of the things that I focused on. Like gay wasn't necessarily a lifestyle. Gay was a sexual thing.
It was a behavior.
It's a behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I think that was something that I had to like come to terms with over time and understand a little bit more about for myself, of myself.
Well, and in this conversation, yes, it's important for me to start to think about what's actually happening versus like what I think might be happening. But we're living in a moment where we have plenty of proof that people are jumping to conclusions about queer people and how they are and what they're doing. I mean, this entire conversation about trans people in bathrooms is born of this. I'm jumping to conclusions about who you are and what you're doing, right? You and I both know that it's an absurd thing. There isn't any trans people are not in bathrooms doing terrible things, right? But it's that assumption. And I think so as a queer person to walk into a space and wonder or be afraid that that is being projected onto you shouldn't be surprising because it has been projected onto us so many times, and it's continuing to happen, right? Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that's where that internalized shame comes from sometimes for myself of like, it's been projected onto me so often, growing up that like, it is really hard for me to like break apart from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big part of my like therapy work, my own personal practices is like, can I start to untether from these like shames that were given to me at some point along the road?
And would you agree with me in saying that one step, maybe one of the early steps, I almost said step one, but it may not be step one.
I'm not going down there.
This is not officially step one, but is to start to try to be aware, to become aware of moments when it is operating or wanting to operate. Oh, there was an indication that I might be described or perceived as being feminine, and I had a feeling about that. And just recognizing, oh, I see you. I see that thing. Mm-hmm. I just want to say, because there's this, masculine, feminine. I was raised by women, and I also love animal nature documentaries. The feminine is fucking awesome. And now, any comparison to the incredible feminine beings that exist in my life, to me, is a compliment. But there was a time when that comparison meant danger. And so we have to do the work to start to unpack that, because, when I was in middle school, when I was such a small person, the comparison to me being feminine meant like maybe a body check, a tackle, a punch, or whatever was just around the corner, So these things start to shift. So it's a tricky. So if you're still struggling with it, as I think I am, and we all do, you're not alone, because safety first.
I mean, as much as I love like queer interactions, especially here in Provincetown, of like being able to like call each other ma'am and girl and like all these things. There is a like playfulness that comes with it, but like it still prickles me. Right? Like when somebody comes up and says girl, I'm like it, but it's gotten like, I understand now where it's coming from.
Sure.
But there's still part of me, just based off of years and years and years of conditioning, that like it still has that little bite to it. And even though I love to do it with my friends, be like, ma'am, really? Right? Like it's still like, I know that it can have that like little bit to it.
It's funny. I was I was in a bar. This was, I don't know, a few years ago, talking to someone, and I was talking to a gay man. We were in a gay bar. Two gay men in a gay bar having a conversation. And I
started a really good joke right there.
Yeah. Exactly. I was speaking about probably something along these lines, and I kept using the word queer. And he finally admitted, he's like, I'm having trouble with your continued use of that word. I said, oh, okay, well, tell me about that. And so he explained that it had been weaponized against him so much that he couldn't identify as queer. And the hearing of it, especially in the casual way that I was saying it, was very uncomfortable, probably because it was very new. I explained to him that I now use the word queer because I want to signal that everybody under the umbrella of queer, which is all LGBTQIA2S plus, people, are safe with me. So I'm a gay man, but I use the word queer because I think it serves that purpose.
Brings more people in, but it doesn't stop it from being riddled with judgment.
Right. And then this idea that, so then I might use the word queer, or I might use the word, I'm like, yes, mama, or whatever word, as ways of reclaiming this sort of shared experience. I think a lot of queer people have had these sorts of things, and words weaponized against them. And so then, if you're a gay man or a trans person or a lesbian, like the words weaponized against you may be a little different, but we've probably all had some version of that experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's just bringing online the curiosity of is this something that is this a label that is something that's bringing up a reaction in me? And can I then bring online my awareness again to pull back from my reaction and sit with what is?
Yeah.
That's
that. Say that one more time, because that feels like, if you're listening to the podcast right now and you're like, okay, well, how do I start to work with my judgment, and so that I can create the space between the emotional reaction and the objective what is? And this feels like one way they could do it. So would you say that one more time, that process?
So for me, a lot of judgment manifests itself in my body as almost like a prickly reaction. And somebody called me a cat the other day. That is my signal. That is my somatic bodily signal. When I start to tense up, when I start to when the quills on my back start to get, or the hair on the back of my neck starts to get like that, then I know that's my trigger. And that's my opportunity to say okay, what has just triggered me about this? Is it that, it's this use of the word queer, and it's bringing me back to middle school, where I was being labeled as a queer as a bad thing, and now I am reacting to it. And so now from my reaction, okay, the awareness, the reaction is connected to the bodily sensation of then I can start to pull back a little bit and say, okay, let me try to find out what is happening here, and starting to separate my reaction from what is.
So I'm going to pause you there. So this is really great. So the first thing I heard was that you had a physical somatic experience that you became aware of. So step one, become aware of your physical sensations and awarenesses in your own felt sense. This is why embodiment is important. This is why we practice, so that we can know that's coming up. So that's an important step one, and a layered step one, because people are going to have different abilities to do that based on what their practices or whatnot. But so once you have that physical sensation, that felt sense, that somatic signal is sent to you, it sounds like you then became aware of it and paused. And then in that moment of pause, you then shine the light of your curious awareness onto what is happening. So if we had a 3-step process, it was notice the physical sensation, pause, shine my light of awareness, and become curious about what just happened.
This is where I believe observation can be so helpful. And so just taking and breaking apart a judgment and saying okay, instead of saying that person is lazy, can I bring in an awareness of that person has, from what I've seen, from what I've witnessed, from what I've observed, that person did not complete this task when they said they were going to complete this task by. So that's the observation. My judgment is that person's lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like that's kind of that step work of saying like, okay, reaction or bodily sensation, something just came up. Okay, now I'm going to pause and now I'm going to look at it. And then from there, start to separate it out a little bit.
So if we use the other example of someone calling you girl or mama or whatever, you have a physical reaction, you pause, you notice that you were triggered by that. And then you start to become like, well, what happened? Oh, they called me this word. I have a feeling or a previous experience of this word, and that makes me feel unsafe or spotlit or, whatever the thing is. Is that?
Yeah. And then the opportunity of saying, okay, like, do I trust this person? Do I understand where they're coming from? Can I have a dialogue with them to understand, am I safe? Right? Because I think that's really what judgment is. It's just, it really is. It's a natural human thing in service of safety.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've just spent so much of my life like fearing for safety that like the work is now to like remind myself that I am safe. And like, so like in those moments of like reaction, I'm just like, okay, like, am I safe? Am I safe with this person? Like this person is calling me ma'am, girl, queer, whatever it might be. And like, okay, like I have a somatic experience and then I'm noticing my reaction. Now I'm pausing and I'm saying, okay, like, am I safe?
Right. Well, that's what we were saying earlier. When I was young and a lot of people, I never thought that women were bad, but I knew that the comparison to me being a woman meant that I was unsafe. And so I think what you just said is so great because I think a lot of queer people in particular, have had to wonder about their safety. And I think that's happening now too. A moment where we are unclear how safe we might be. And so bringing this awareness of, oh, I'm feeling unsafe. And then recognizing, is that a legitimate lack of safety? In which case, we start taking action. Maybe I need to leave here. Maybe I need to, or is it a lack of safety because of decades of bullying or misunderstanding? In which case, you may be able to have a really fruitful, deep experience where you are if you can let that go. So thank you for shining the light on that process a little bit. But it sounds like continuous work as are most things, right? Why we do a practice.
It's called a practice.
That's right. Not a practice. That's right. Thank you for that. That's great. That's a really great thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that reminder of safety, and like when I was hearing you talk about like where we're at today and the amount of the lack of safety for so many, like I can relate a little bit because I know what it feels like in my body to like walk through this world feeling so unsafe so often of my day, and like the havoc that it wreaks on me. And one of the things that it can do to me is it like if I'm going through the world constantly afraid of being judged, what I end up then doing is judging the world
as a defensive mechanism.
As a defense mechanism, right? And like I'm not my highest self in those moments, like because I'm in a state of like fear. I'm in a state of feeling unsafe. And so if I'm walking through the world in that state, then I'm not vibrating at a high frequency. I'm going to be judging so much.
Well, this is another example then of like why embodiment practice, why yogic practices are so beneficial, because most of them have a direct impact on our nervous system. Yeah. And so if we are walking around the world in this sympathetic fight or flight state, we are going to be hyper vigilant for danger. And we all know that if I walk around the world looking for something, or it's deeply in my awareness, I'm going to probably see more of it, right? So it feels like a snowball kind of thing. And these practices can give us the opportunity to turn the volume down just enough to get a little bit of clarity. And I would say this when I worked with my acupuncture patients, like, do these practices, especially when you're not in pain or when you're not in that heightened state, so that you start to build that neural pathway. It gets more and more powerful. But just turning down the volume can help us create the necessary space between feeling really unsafe and then having to judge or be aware of judgment for our own protection. And, well, how is it I actually want to be right now? How is it I want to feel? How is it I want to engage? So, friendly reminder, this will be an ongoing process, especially if you're starting right now. You're gonna try, and there are gonna be moments when it works and moments when it doesn't work, and moments when you are falling back into patterns of judgment or feeling really judged by other people and having that reaction. Be gentle with yourself. That's another aspect of men's work, of yogic work, of shamanic work, is it's a process and it's a slow sort of unfolding, and allowing yourself to have that. It is not a light switch. So it isn't stop judging. It's become aware of when you judge, how you judge, if it serves you, and go from there. So bit by bit, putting it together.
Judgment isn't bad, y'all.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to put a judgment on judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, how can we use it for our benefit?
Right.
Just like quick little story of this week. So one of the biggest fears that I've been working through recently is the fear of judgment, of being judged by others, and how that creates such a like physical reaction in me. And like it just comes down to, like, if I'm being judged by others, that means I'm under their spotlight and I'm at their, like, whim of whether or not I belong, whether or not I'm accepted. And, like, that to me is, like, can feel like death sometimes. And so, like, there have been moments over the last, I would say, like 4 or 5 days, like, as I've been thinking about, like, the practices that I wanted to bring for the sharing circle and the embodiment circle this past week, of, like, going through so much self-doubt, so much self-sabotage, so much self-judgment based off of what I thought, like, other people were going to judge me by. And so, like, by putting these practices together, I was going through my own practice, right? And it was just, like, the amount of journaling that I was doing, and, like, resentment clearing practices, and, like, fearless, and all these things of, like, just trying to, like, work through my own shit, my own fear of judgment is what really inspired this week. You know, because it's such a, like, such a powerful thing to recognize in us, because it really can be so prohibitive. It can be so preventative of what we do in our lives, the actions that we take that could lead us to feeling better, to healing, to processing, right? A lot of the times for me, like, that comes from a very vulnerable state where I'm going to have to put myself into a position of being judged.
Yeah. Well, and that's, like, the journey of the artist, right? You have to be willing to try some things and see how they work and see how they fit. And I would argue that some of the greatest pieces of art that have been created came from a process that had to be a little messy or go a little wrong at times, or, you know, have its own evolution. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing the space with me today. Do you feel complete?
I feel complete.
All right, will you take us out?
I will. Let's close our eyes. Take a deep inhale. Soft exhale through the mouth. And with deep appreciation and gratitude for this shared space, this sacred circle, this conversation, any insights that came, any awarenesses, I wish all of the listeners safety, community, brotherhood, love. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.
Aho.